one of the most beautiful seas in the world, the Salish Sea.
Salty air that's mixed with a little bit of decaying seaweed, I think, is just the most beautiful smell.
You can look on a map and you can see this spot on a globe, no matter the scale of the map. And you can see that this water is connected to the Pacific, and this water is connected to all the other oceans of the world. And when you live on the edge of the Salish Sea, you're reminded of that.
That sea stretches from the state of Washington all the way up to Desolation Sound in British Columbia.
I was on Craigslist, oyster farm needed on Quadra Island. And I didn't even know where it was. So I applied. And a couple days later, I was on the ferry. From the moment I got onto the boat, I was in. Picture perfect, straight west coasting kind of BC day, you know, like the sun cresting up over the coastal interior mountains, the layers and the depths of all the islands between the straits, and you know, the light quick chop across like the glittering aluminum boat. It's perfect. When I'm on the boat, smiling ear to ear. I was never brought up to think that I'd be living out on the ocean. You know, when I was younger, it was not like, yeah, I'm gonna grow up and I'm gonna go live on a boat and farm oysters on the North Pacific coast, hoorah. That was never something I was excited about.
I'm going on 4 years on the water now, and it's worked its way into me, and I love it. Like I never thought it was gonna happen, and man, am I sure happy that it has. I don't think it's something that you lose. It's something that will continue to be a part of my life.
Even the commute to work's a nice treat. You know, sometimes traffic's bad and you know, you get held up by a pod of dolphins or you know, a couple orcas cruising by, right? You gotta enjoy the show for a little while. You get out there and first thing you see is all the rafts kicking, and you know, you start getting into it. You see how they're doing. You know, we're just taking care of them and making sure that they're happy. Happy food's healthy food. And if the oysters are happy, they taste really good. And if they're really, really happy, they even look beautiful too.
We don't feed them, we don't medicate them. Everything, all the growth is from the natural plankton growing. Oh yes, that could be a good idea.
Right? Like they're still a little fragile. They're not super hard, but they're
Well, yes, that's a good reason to grow oysters. For me, I've grown a lot of different things in my farming career. I've grown from vegetables to corn to beef. If I'm out here and things aren't sort of very nice, it's raining, it's blowing, I'm sort of fed up. I go to the farmer's market and I'm selling these oysters, these little beauties, to the people. That's what makes farming really worthwhile.
Every time I see a salmon, I see a killer whale, I think of where they've been. I think of the time they've spent out in the ocean and where they've been out in the Pacific. I put my toe in the water here, and there's another family in Japan putting their toe in the same water. And to me, that represents a connection that we all have. Everybody that lives here on this planet is connected by these great bodies of water. And when you live on the edge of the Salish Sea, you're reminded of that. I love to return here and smell that salt smell, that sort of salt creosote smell that you smell at the ferry docks and near the harbors. It's just part of me. I mean, I've always lived here. This water is important, just as important as the land we live on. Our lives don't stop at the edge of the beach.
Change is happening now at a much faster pace than it ever did. And that rate of change is what scares me. One thing that's happening in our oceans is an increase in the acidity in our ocean. Our ocean waters are becoming more corrosive. And that is a big deal because it affects tiny little larvae. It makes it harder for them to grow their shells, and some of those tiny little invertebrates are the base of our food chain.
pH level affects the very small, very tiny oysters. There's a lot of uncertainty within the industry. We've seen an initial effect in the shortage of oyster seed, and we're just hoping there that this won't carry on. If you don't have seed, you don't have anything. Will it start to affect the adult oyster, the adult clam, the adult mussel? There's lots of areas in the world that produce oysters, and they're going to have the same issues. We can't fence off part of the Pacific Ocean and say it's just in there. So it's going to be a problem everywhere. We have a spectacular resource with clean water, lots of little sheltered coves like this one, where we can produce sustainable, clean, healthy seafood. And yet, maybe this is all going to go to pot.
Many of us researchers and coastal community members, we are some of the eyes and ears on the ocean, and we are some of the people that can see and witness big changes that have implications for human well-being across North America, across our planet. And so I think it's our responsibility to share that information with the public.
It's a tremendously exciting time in oceanography because we're now understanding that there's still unknowns about the connection between the ocean and the atmosphere and the whole climate system. I co-led an expedition in the Arctic to collect one of the first long paleoclimate records there. It's a time period, 55 million years ago, when the planet warmed. I call it the Big Heat. It's a time period where records from all over the planet have demonstrated that there was a big increase in temperature on the planet, very rapid. And there was an increase in CO2 in the atmosphere, methane in the atmosphere, increased ocean acidification. Mass extinction occurred, particularly in North America in terms of mammals. What we're doing today, if you compare today to that time period during the Big Heat, we're releasing greenhouse gases into the atmosphere at a faster pace than then. The oceans are a critical piece of the planet in terms of the climate of the planet. We have to understand it because we know the planet's changing. It's really, how do we mitigate the impacts on our populations? We can monitor this change, understand it, and act.
I think what's really helped us is the high-tech world that we can go online and we can look at the ocean currents. So we can look at the maps of the Earth and we can see how everything's swirling out there and how everything moves around as one big unit. That has really helped give us a bigger picture of where we are. We're no longer just here in this house on the Salish Sea, down on the beach, and all we see are the things that float past us. Now we can step back and actually see the planet like the astronauts did when they first went into space, and they could see how precious of a place it was.
The motivation for Ocean Networks Canada came from a team of scientists, and they had this vision of being able to understand what I call now actually the sea beneath the surface. Most of the oceans we observe through satellites, and so we just see the very skim of the top of the ocean, which represents 70% of the planet. But in fact, 90% of the life form sits in that volume beneath the surface. So the sea beneath the surface is not understood very well. And so these scientists said, why don't we take new technology, wire the ocean floor so that we can put sensors there, monitor that huge volume of our planet, always connected 24/7. I grew up appreciating the ocean and loving going to the beach every summer for 2 weeks. And so when I went off to college, I went into ocean engineering, went out to sea for the first time, fell in love with it because not only was the day-to-day work at sea all about change, but seeing that the ocean was all about change was just a nice connection for me. Oceanography in the past was first done from small vessels close to shore by throwing a piece of string over the side with some wax on it to measure the water depth and sample the bottom. And those piecemeal pieces of data over many decades finally put together the beginnings of the puzzle of the oceans.
One of the 20th century's most famous authors, John Steinbeck, and his friend Ricketts used this boat to go out and study the ocean and study how humans are affecting the ocean and how that might reflect on our future. This boat was built from Douglas fir, was built on the south end of the Salish Sea, and now it's a rotting relic sitting in the back corner of a boatyard, lost to history.
Ricketts and Steinbeck were connected to many places up and down the Pacific coast. They traveled and worked together down to the Sea of Cortez and all the way up through to California. Ricketts spent a lot of time on the west coast of Vancouver Island and even up on Haida Gwaii. I think Steinbeck captured not only some of the amazing detail about the natural history of our coast, but the sense of passion, the adventure of it all.
In the 1940s, Steinbeck was particularly concerned when he and his biologist friends saw they were just strip mining the bottom of the ocean and what that might mean for the future of ocean health around the world. This was, almost 80 years ago.
Ricketts and Steinbeck were a magical pair. They both were incredibly talented people. Ricketts had an in-depth understanding of the sea around him. And of course, Steinbeck was such a good writer. They were sharing their passion about the ocean, their knowledge of the ocean, and their concern for it. I think about how can I now collect information and ask the right kinds of questions to reverse some of those changes, those dramatic declines. What kind of information now can help us reverse those declines in terms of policy, and what kind of science do we need to actually inform those kinds of policies?
We're going to see more of these kind of cabled systems with sensors where people can sit at home and study the ocean right from their living rooms. Will provide information on things like ocean acidification and low oxygen in the water. Those kinds of things will be much more critically important as we move along the path of increased impact on the oceans from climate change.
Personally, I've seen a lot of different things in my life where there's been a problem, and the human is an amazing creature, can adapt to the circumstance. But can we adapt to this? I doubt it, but we don't really know. For us, it's the ocean has been really a way of us earning a living and paying for our children to go to university and school and all the rest of it. And it would be a great shame, a disaster really, if it wasn't available for future generations and as a production source of good food for the planet. So we need to look after it, and we've got to remember that the majority of the Earth's surface is water.
You know, we live here for a reason. You have to work here. You have to work hard to live here. Right? It's not easy living. We got to deal with storms. You're still chopping your own wood. We're eating out of the ocean. This is the environment and the home that we live in. And if it doesn't provide, and if it's not there for us, we can't be there for it. You know, from scientists to fellas like myself who are just trying to stay afloat.
I think I've spent thousands of hours on the water because the water is part of who I am and what makes me feel whole. Maybe I'm delusional, but I am an optimist, and I do think that there are innovative solutions that we can develop now and that we can learn about from the past that will offer solutions to some of these major challenges.
Oh, my love, you are fighting against your lungs, and I against my eyes. Separate the time spent away. Oh my God, we are fighting against the threats. By the very fabric, to celebrate the time spent today. I met you at the border crossing, gave up kisses like a winter's frost.